What's going on, y'all, and welcome back to my channel. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to give a huge shout out to each and every one of you who's been watching and supporting this series. I've been getting amazing feedback from you guys on Instagram, on Twitter, and even in my Twitch stream. So I really appreciate all the love and support for this series. And if you guys want to be a part of this series, if you feel like you have something that you want to share to my audience, definitely shoot me an email, shoot me a DM, whatever works. I reply to everyone. So definitely feel free to reach out to me. But for today, we're talking to the other half of the GoreFriends Podcast. She goes by the name of Story. We talk about everything from her writing and marketing career in Los Angeles to Black women representation on Twitch and YouTube and a lot more. So if you guys take anything away from this interview, definitely don't forget to drop a comment or just shoot me a message. And yeah, let's get right into it. Yo, what up, y'all? Olympus Gaming back again with another OG conversation. This time we have episode 3. Today I have joining me the other half of the GoreXStory Podcast, who goes by the name of Story. What up?
Yo, GoreFriends Podcast.
Yo, awesome. So Story, for the folks out there who do not know, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the other half of the GoreFriends Podcast. It's a horror podcast where we do deep dives into horror movies with a comedic twist. And I am also a full-time creative writer and I suppose a media personality.
All that.
Yeah. I stream on Twitch. All of my streams are pop streams. I do not have a schedule because I like watching everyone else, like Olympus. So,
That's dope. Yo, I for the first time I heard the term pop stream. I didn't even know that was like a term that people use, like pop stream. Like, what is that? Oh, you just pop up on Twitch whenever you feel like it. I'm like, oh, I like that. I'm about to start using that. So I guess since we're on the topic of gaming, I guess I'll kind of dive into your history with that. How did you get into gaming, and what was the thing that made you want to stream on Twitch?
Oh man, so my earliest memories of gaming are like the first Mortal Kombat games. My brother, he's 3 years older than me, and he was always the one with the console, and I was always the one asking to play. And so I remember just growing up and kind of evolving with all of the consoles that he would get over the years, from Nintendo to Dreamcast to PlayStation and GameCube. And,
everything.
Yeah, played a little bit of everything. From like sports games. I just wanted to play and be involved, and we moved around a lot, so my siblings were really the only friends I had for a long time, and video games were the only real escape we had for a while. So yeah, I've always had an interest in video games, and then I got older and met Mars, and we used to have like video game parties and stuff in college, and she actually was one of the people that encouraged me to stream, along with my boyfriend Monty, who also streams Llama Libre, and we do a lot of like couple or multiplayer gameplay on my Twitch channel. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Yo, that is dope, and it's cool that you said that you're really into. It sounds like you're really into like the multiplayer aspect of it, or the social aspect of video games.
Yeah.
You have siblings, which is awesome. Me personally, I grew up as an only child, so usually the games I kind of gravitate towards are really story-driven single-player experiences, because as an only child, that was the thing that kept my attention, was single-player experiences with very deep stories. And since I didn't have anyone to necessarily play games with, at least not full-time, those are the things that I used to pass the time. But of course, we have birthday parties and get-togethers with different friends. We play like Mario Party and Mario Kart and Smash Bros and all that. So got a little bit of that, but as far as like multiplayer, I don't really dive into multiplayer too much, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm always like, what can we play together?
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about Twitch, just not just with Twitch, but also with YouTube and other platforms, is that not only is it a great way to clear out your backlog of video games, because if you're anything like me, you buy games, they come out so quick, you buy multiple, next thing you know, you have like 30 games you have to finish. But it is a very cool way to socialize, especially with the recent pandemic and the with the quarantine and all these other things. Having that in-person social interaction is not necessarily the best thing right now due to the current state of the United States. So having Twitch, I feel like for a lot of people is that social element. Like I feel like on my Twitch streams, people just talk about everything they're going through, and I'm super grateful that people feel that comfortable with me to share personal aspects of their lives. So I think Twitch has a lot of beautiful things about it as far as like the social aspect of it.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree, and it was such a lifesaver during quarantine. And I was playing a couple of action games like Dying Light. I'm not sure if you played that one.
I've not played it, but I've seen plenty of gameplay.
Too much action for me. I could not handle it, but that was actually where I kind of started streaming. Mars and Monty would help me through the game, and I would stream purely for them to watch me play and like tell me, hey, you need to go up that wall, you're going the wrong way, turn around. So it was a lifesaver for sure.
Yeah, and it's dope that you have that support system behind you when you get started, because one thing I was talking to Mars about was I kind of picked her brain about this, is that when, especially now with what's going on Twitch, if you saw the news reports about Twitch blackout with sexual harassment and everything else going on their platform, a lot of times I talk to, female gamers and women that's on the platform, and they always tell me about, it took a lot out of them to really just build up the courage to put themselves out there on Twitch or YouTube or whatever the case is, due to, the overwhelming amount of harassment that goes on the platform. So I kind of want to pick your brain about that. Was that something that you thought about, prior to hopping on Twitch?
OMG, yes. Like,
it's all right there.
I am still low-key afraid of fully diving into streaming because of those reasons. I grew up being a geek. Like, I had no choice. I was raised by uncles and cousins and brothers that were all into anime and kung fu movies and video games and comic books, and I got into all of it. So I go to conventions and I experience certain things there where people gatekeep, and they're like, oh, you don't belong here, what are you doing here? Even with my taste in music, I went to a Linkin Park concert once, and people are like, oh, aren't you like at a Beyonce concert? So there's always this fear being a Black girl and entering like a very like niche, I suppose, subject or hobby where you don't normally see people that look like yourself in that space.
Right.
And so I remember telling Mars, like, oh, I don't know if I'm entertaining enough or pretty enough, or I feel like there's a certain aesthetic for a lot of female gamers, and a certain type of female nerd that's widely accepted, and I don't feel like I fit that description. So it's a lot of growing pains.
I and I really appreciate you shedding light on that, because I feel like that story right there is what a lot of young women feel before hopping on something like Twitch, where they have this this overwhelming interest in video games, but due to the things that you just said with the imagery of the quote unquote girl gamer, or what's being pushed by the video game industry, it being a male dominated industry, I think that definitely plays into a lot of women kind of shying away from this. So a lot of times they will lurk in chats, they won't say anything. I even had female followers who will like message me saying, hey, I'm a female, but I don't want to reveal that to the chat because I'm fear of being harassed. So that stuff like that is why we need to have the conversation when it comes to, like you mentioned, the gatekeeping, the harassment, just the overall imagery of women in video games. And I gave this a lot of thought, and me and Mars kind of touched on this with our conversation, is that historically, when you look at video games, when it was at its very, not necessarily peak, but kind of getting there, I would say like around PS1-ish era, when you look at the imagery of, female protagonists in video games, like the old Lara Croft models and stuff like Morgan from Darkstalkers, and even to an extent like Sega did it with Rouge de Bat and Sonic Adventure 2, where they're making these female figures highly sexualized. And I think, when you put those images in front of an adolescent's mind, with kids, males 8 to 16 seeing these, and then you have the advertisements with, women with the crop tops and putting the controller wire in their mouths and stuff like that. That just definitely pushes the stereotype, and that is something that we have to talk about and say, hey, that is not an accurate representation at all.
Right. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of it's a weird comparison, but it's a lot like comparing it to a kid's first experience or knowledge of sex coming from porn, and it creating this unrealistic idea for what sexual experiences are or should be. And it happens the same way in video games. Kids get into video games. My nephew is 4 and he has his own console. So, he's already being molded and shaped to think and look at the world a certain way. And video games have a lot of power, just as much as TV shows. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So when they over-sexualize the female protagonist and they only show a certain type of female protagonist, a certain race or body type, and it goes for the same for guys as well. There are a lot of guys that body shame other men, and you look at anime and stuff, like how many six packs does Goku have? Like,
it's so funny that you say that, because that is real. That is true. Like, yes, we have body shaming and we have asset shaming on the female side, but yeah, those images were also pushed amongst male. You can go as far back as like He-Man, or like you said, Dragon Ball Z. And it's so funny you say that, because Dragon Ball Z was actually my motivation to get my ass in the gym. So it was
literally, I was just saying today, like, I need to start a Super Saiyan workout program. Like,
when I saw like Majin, like with the veins popping out his shoulder, I'm like, I don't like that. So that's definitely true. It's unfortunate, but what can we do? So as far as the harassment piece, has there been any experiences that you had being on Twitch and being on this public forum, or just in general, just for the fact that you were a Black female into video games, into anime, and into comics and all that?
So far, it hasn't happened to me personally. Again, I don't stream regularly, but I have witnessed it happen to other people. Like, I've witnessed it on Mars's channel and her chat, but it has not happened to me personally on Twitch. It has happened to me in a lot of other environments and on other platforms, and just in person, because people are that bold apparently, where you get judged for liking anime and like I said earlier, other tastes in music even. So yeah, it takes a lot to put yourself out there and dive into a new subject or genre and hope you're going to be accepted.
Yeah, and where do you? I asked Mars the same question too. Where do you think this stems from? Because I know we touched on the media representation of that and how that can mold a young brain into thinking one way, but when this behavior or this mindset state transitions itself out of adolescence and into adulthood, why do you feel like this is still a conversation that needs to be had in terms of the video game industry, in terms of women on public forums? Like, what do you think is the overall root cause of this?
Oh man, there are a couple of different catalysts for it, I think. For one, I feel like it has a lot to do with representation. If you're not seeing black female protagonists or even black male protagonists regularly in video games, how do you expect there to be a space for those people in that world? You know, because a lot of it, even if you look at cosplay, right, a lot of people say, oh, well, you don't look like that character, you're black, you can't cosplay that character. So it's like, why don't we have more characters to choose from? You know, why don't we have more that look like us so that more people can get used to seeing us in that realm? But then also it goes back to I don't want to get too deep, but man,
go for it.
It kind of goes back to like slave mentality,
right,
and being different, or, you know, being too much like, you know, our white counterparts. And so people are like, oh, why do you feel the need to be different? Why not just be like the rest of us and, you know, just keep your head low and, you know, do these things because that's what's expected of us. I had, you know, family members, like very few, because honestly most of my family is nerdy, but I remember having like one cousin in particular that was like, oh, my little white girl cousin, and I'm like, yo, why? And that even in college, I encountered other women that just didn't understand, black women that just didn't understand how I could like anime and just thought it was childish. And it kind of stems from, you know, if, you know, there aren't any black people involved in it, why are we getting involved in it? So we just need to see more black creators in those spaces, and we also just need to see more representation and make it a regular thing, and not just, oh, that one black character in that one anime that got like 3 minutes of screen time for the whole show, you know. So if we just had more representation so people could get used to seeing us in those spaces, but then it's also kind of on us to create representation for ourselves.
Right. Yeah, and it's very interesting that you pointed out the community aspect, because I even got that growing up a lot too. When you know, showing interest in video games, anime, technology, cosplaying, cons, things like that, you know, it was always kind of frowned upon. And I think a lot of times, you know, like you said, people are typically not used to seeing, you know, black people in these spaces. So when they do see it, it is such a different image. Shock. It is. Yeah, it is. It's kind of, and I see that now with, you know, with my profession being in consumer electronics, with the lack of diversity. You know, I've had plenty of people, you know, just kind of say like, what, you do what, really? And it's just like, it's like, why is that shocking? Like, is it really that far-fetched and that rare? And when I went to Silicon Valley, it is like, is almost, it was so shocking to me when I hopped off the plane and I went to the Silicon Valley, and just kind of walking around and going to like these different campuses and not seeing anyone who looked like me. You may spot one if you're lucky, you might, but for the most part, no. So I definitely think it has to start somewhere. And I think the worst thing that we can do is shun someone for showing interest in something that you either A, have no idea what it's about, or B, that you just don't understand. So I always encourage people, if you know somebody who's interested in something, make an effort to try to educate yourself on what they're into. I'm not saying that you have to pick up a new hobby or you have to necessarily engage yourself in that particular subculture, but at least educate yourself enough to know what that is about, so you don't sound ignorant when you shun somebody for liking something that you don't.
Exactly. I agree 110%. I am always trying new shows and games and things, because it's like, how do you know you don't like it? Watch it. I got into a whole Facebook argument because of a meme that was like, one of these things has to go, and it was a bunch of childhood cartoons, and Avatar The Last Airbender was on there, and someone was like, oh, that one can go. And I said, yo, have you even seen it though? Avatar The Last Airbender?
I've never seen it.
No, I haven't seen it, but it can go. It looks dumb. It's like, yo, you haven't even seen it, and you're saying it's dumb. Like, I can't believe the blasphemy. Like, it's cool if you haven't seen it, but don't judge something just because
Absolutely.
it's different from what you're normally into and you haven't even tried it yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is why like I love talking to different types of creators, because even if I'm not an expert in something, I'm always open to learn about it. One of the goals I set out when I started realizing that, hey, I'm building this community out, whether it's YouTube or Twitch, whatever the case is, I wanted to create a safe space. The one of the rules that I drill into my followers, like, yo, if we have a woman come into the stream, or we have women, because in my streams I like to think it's 50-50, 50% women, 50% guys. And if anybody says anything sexist, harassment, and I hear about it, you're gone. I don't care if you donated 1,000,000 bits, you're out. So that's kind of like the mindset, and that kind of leads into the next thing with accountability. I think a lot of men, or especially male streamers, don't really hold their followers accountable for things like that. I've seen it go on in certain streams where they will have a female viewer, and then the chat is like just saying all sorts of shit to this girl, and then the streamer is just like laughing along with it. So psychologically, that is like a co-signing of that behavior. So I think that is one thing that we have to kind of break when it comes to women on the platform, is that we have to start holding other men accountable for treating the women on the platform the way that they do.
True that. Facts, no scam.
Facts. Yeah. So anyways, kind of switching gears here. Professionally, you told me that you are a writer and you also work in the marketing field. Tell me a little bit about that and how you got into it.
For sure. So while I was in school, I kind of started doing light web design, like super light web design, for my college's student government. And then the school's webmaster saw my work and picked me up and was like, hey, I have a job for you. So I started off doing web management. Totally wasn't what I was in school for, saw myself doing. Like I said earlier, I went to film school and I was like, I'm going to be a writer. And I thought it was really funny in your conversation with Mars, how you're saying, people go to LA and they're like, oh, I have no money, but I'm going to go to LA and I'm going to make it happen. And that was, even though I was born in LA, I had moved to a different county and then I moved back and I only had $5 in my pocket, moved to Hollywood. And I was like, yo, I'm going to be a screenwriter. Didn't happen, but made a lot of great connections and got a lot of education. So really wasn't expecting to get into like web management, things like that. But I did use my screenwriting skills to write blogs and do all sorts of web content. And that led me onto being a professional copywriter, and I primarily just worked for marketing firms. And so it's kind of ironic. I did end up becoming a writer, just not in the industry I thought that I would. So,
right, but it's still a stepping stone.
Yeah, it's a huge stepping stone. It's not like, I'm paid well now. Starting off, it was horrible because as a creative, especially in California, no one tells you that, people are going to try to take advantage of your talent. They tell you, oh, you're going to have a hard time making it, but they don't tell you it's because people are just being cheap and don't want to pay you what you're worth. So it was a lot of learning, a lot of trial and error, hopping from company to company and doing a lot of freelance until I finally landed with some companies that actually, want to pay you for your work. And now I'm writing for ads and commercials and things like that for a tech company that has several other businesses underneath it that I also write for. So nice. And it's funny because you don't get to see a lot of Black people in marketing, which it makes sense now when you see commercials that are kind of racist, and you're like, where were the Black people during this board meeting when they said this commercial was okay? They're not there. They'll say, oh, we have a really diverse team. I'm the only Black person on the marketing team.
Wow.
In my current company and in past companies that I've worked for, they do not have a lot of voices on those teams that are people of color, and particularly that are Black.
Yeah.
So don't believe the hype. Just letting you know, I am very appreciative. I have a great job and it's a great environment, but if they were to go that route, I'm glad I would be the one there to be like, hey guys, that's not PC. You guys shouldn't do that, you know?
Right. Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing, because when you look at, not just marketing, but when you look at the media as a whole, it's very interesting that I always found it intriguing that you have companies with, white board of directors or, white marketing directors, so on and so forth, curating content for the Black community. I always found that dynamic a little odd, and I just always wondered who did they run this by, or how many Blacks do we have actually calling the shots, or actually, kind of looking at this content and saying, you may not want to show that, we may not want to do that. And I feel like media is very powerful, whether it's in the written form, still images, videos, YouTube, whatever the case is. And when you have people who don't come from where we come from, or you have people who don't have the understanding of what our culture is, creating this content, it will ultimately become a miscommunication. It will ultimately kind of lead to negative stereotypes and lead to negative imagery of our people. So yes, I do 100% agree that a lot of these big media companies and technology companies have to start diversifying, especially if they want to increase the legitimacy of their business.
Yeah, for sure. It's a guessing game, essentially. They're like, oh, what are Black people like? What do we know about them? Let's figure it out. And I'm going to let you in on a secret. There are literally books out there on copywriting for marketing purposes that teaches you how to profile your audience. And I've had to read some of these books for jobs that I've worked in. It just baffles me, because you have these old white dudes that wrote these books in the 90s, but they've been revised 4 times, and there's 4 or 5, 6 editions of them, and they're still being sold, still being recycled. And these people are like, hey, try to think of your audience as humans with brains. I like to think of them that way sometimes. And it's why do you have to remind people that you're writing for other people, and then to go further and teach people how to profile a demographic? It's kind of triggering. That word profile is triggering for me. I don't know if it is for you. I was raised by Black police officers, so and it's still triggering for me, because they taught me about how police profile. And so to think of your audience as someone that you can profile is just kind of startling in a way. And there are other ways to go about learning your demographics, such as hiring a diverse team that is among that demographic. So it's a crazy world, marketing.
So let me pick your brain about that then. Why do you think that these companies are hesitant in hiring from a diverse pool of people?
I don't think they're all hesitant about hiring from a diverse pool. Honestly, I hardly see a lot of, because I've been in a position where I had to interview people at a marketing firm, and I didn't get to interview any Black people. There just weren't any Black people applying for, and that's not with every company. That's 1 or 2 very small marketing firms in Southern California. But I feel like a lot of creatives in general feel, oh, well, I want to do graphic design, or I want to do animation. Perfect example. There's an animator on my marketing team currently, and he's a person of color. And most people think, oh, I want to do animation, so I'm only going to apply to Disney and Marvel and DC, right?
The big guys, yeah.
Yeah, people that make, cartoons, but animators are needed in so many different fields. we animate commercials, we animate a lot of different things, little videos for social media. And so we have a full-time animator that works 40 hours a week, get PTO and sick
Wow.
time and benefits. And there are animators out there currently freelancing and struggling because they're not thinking about some of these 9-to-5 places that desperately need an animator. So point being, you can be a creative in a very unconventional space, and still get that creative flow out without sacrificing your soul for, making copies for somebody. You can still be a writer or be an animator and work like in marketing or, at a university or anywhere.
So it's all about expanding or, looking above, what you're essentially looking above or looking at the bigger picture overall, saying like, hey, don't limit yourself to just these three options. There's a million other options out there.
Exactly.
That's real.
Because let me tell you, I've applied for DC Comics to be one of their editors. For years I've been applying. I must have applied twice a year for the last 4 years or so. Right. And I had an employee referral. They never called me. So it's like, is everyone experiencing this? Is everyone only applying to, Universal and DC and Marvel and hoping that they get a call back, and they don't, and they're like, oh, the dream is dead, and that's just it, when there are other spaces out there to giving you the opportunity to create.
Yeah, and I think with conglomerates like that, and I can kind of speak to this a little bit because what I do, those companies, your top tier companies, your Disneys, your Apples, your Facebooks, your whatevers, those companies from the corporate level inside are so small. So the likelihood of them hiring somebody from the outside to come into that small circle is very, very small. So that kind of rounds back to what you were saying, having, kind of lowering your expectations a little bit and maybe taking a job that is like a stepping stone for you to get to the overarching goal is definitely more important. Like, you just can't come fresh out of, a lot of people, they go to college, they come out and they think, oh, I'm going to get this big job at this big firm, when you haven't even started at the base level yet. So you're absolutely right. Looking at all options instead of the top immediately is going to definitely be more beneficial, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where it's already a city of connections from what I've seen. It's not about necessarily what you know, it's who you know, and the relationships that you build upon that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of my earlier jobs I got through friends, and even like I said, I had an employee referral for DC Comics because of a friend that went to college with Mars and I, who currently is an artist for DC. Still didn't work though. It really just, it depends. People are fickle. If they're having a bad day, they might not feel like hiring you that day, and then they'll forget about you the next day, and you have to just keep at it and keep trying. But right. Like I said, I dropped out of college like a couple of times, and it wasn't even intentional every time. It was just life happened and I had to stop, and I ended up gaining more of my experience just going out into the field and working rather than being in school, which, not downing college at all, because I have a lot of college educated friends. But it's not for everyone. Not everyone is, some people go to school and they overwork themselves when, C's get degrees, and other people like myself just have a hard time staying within that structure, or finances happen and life happens. But there are companies out there that are willing to work and mold someone that doesn't have that education. They're just a lot harder to find, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that is slowly changing, because as we kind of get more advanced with technology and advance of how people socialize and things like that, yes, college, the whole idea of it is to broaden your horizons and, teach you the fundamentals of life and, also teach you about your given field that you're going into. But what it doesn't necessarily teach you is how to go out there and build those solid connections before you even start putting applications in. So there's so many times where I meet kids and they're fresh out of college, but they have no social skills. I'm just like, yes, you have that piece of paper or that degree, but what exactly does that mean in the long term? Because I can tell you a lot of companies, they're going to probably hire the person who, depending on the field of work, they're probably going to hire the person who is charismatic, confident in themselves, know the product or service in and out, versus the person who just has a degree and think that's going to be enough. In today's society, that's not enough.
Oh, really every time. I kid you not, the current company I work for, which I love so much, it is a diverse company. It's just my marketing team is small, and so I'm the only Black person on the team. On my marketing team. But in my interview, I remember the CEO, who's a Korean man, was like, "Hey, do you like Fairy Tail, the anime?" And I was like, "Yo, I'm in season 9 right now." He was like, "Okay, you're hired."
Wow.
And he was looking for people that are different, and he liked the fact that I have a podcast. He likes the fact that I freelance and I don't have, a ton of education in that field, because he can mold me and show me how they do things there. And it worked out. It's cool.
Yeah, that's super dope. And again, I think that narrative is definitely changing, because I think now companies are realizing, like, hey, we can hire somebody who already has a following and who already does these things versus somebody who was taught, because there are just certain things you just can't teach. You can't teach somebody how to be a personality, or you can't necessarily teach public speaking. For some people, it just comes natural. So it's definitely heading in a direction that's getting very interesting, especially with this recent pandemic. So
yeah, for sure, everything's changing now, especially because so many people were let go from work, and not everyone knows how to work from home. I've learned. I found out that my job tried hiring some freelance writers and allowing them to work remotely, and it would take them like 5 days to turn in like one article that isn't even that long and should only take you like half a day to write. Right. So not everybody can work from home. So now is the time for those freelancers that have been at it and have a portfolio, to, really shine and be like, hey, I've been doing this for a long time, and people are looking for a lot of contract workers right now because that's all they can afford. They can't afford to put someone on a salary or, provide a benefits program right now. So now's your time, man. Creatives, come out the dark, come out the shadows.
Exactly. And that is something I always drive home with this quarantine, the situation that we're in. I usually tell people, you're never, at least if they clear this up or they come up with some sort of vaccine or something like that, you're never in your life is going to have this much free time. So, I could tell you, once this quarantine started and I started working from home and, started really diving into my creative bag, like I've got way more done and I'm actually happier because I'm getting all this stuff done and I'm kind of finding out what I enjoy, what I don't like so on and so forth. So you're absolutely right. This is the perfect opportunity to just kind of drive, in your passions and, just do you while you have the time to do it. Because like I said, once things kind of go back to normal, you're never going to have this opportunity again, more than likely.
Oh, for sure. Like, expand those skills, you guys. Now's the time. If you're one of those people that are at home right now, I know Mars mentioned to you that she was doing a lot of video editing for a plastic surgeon, and then during the quarantine is when she started streaming, and then she became an affiliate in like a month. It was crazy.
Which is crazy. I know. When she told me, I'm like, what? Like, you even can hear it in my voice. I was like, when did you start streaming? Oh yeah, April of this year.
She started. Yeah. Yeah, she just started. She was like, "Hey, I'm in the house." I remember she would talk to me. She's like, "Yo, I think I'm gonna get a new mic, and I think I'm gonna get this new cord for my Elgato, and I'm gonna do this and do that." And I was like, "You're putting a lot into this, and you only started a week ago." But she did it. Like, she put all of it. She went all in and invested in it, and then she became an affiliate in like a month because that's what she wanted to do, and she accomplished it. Like, y'all can do it, man.
That's super dope. Yeah, yo, shout out to 2Eager, yo. That is amazing. So speaking of that, you and 2Eager have a podcast together. You are the second half of that podcast. I guess before we jump into that, tell me about your roots when it comes to the horror genre. What is it exactly about horror do you just love? Like, what is it like? Where did you start in terms of like your infatuation of horror?
I know exactly where I started, and I was 5, and I remember it was October, and all the horror movies were coming on TV, and I wanted to stay up and watch them all, and I hadn't seen a horror movie before. And my mom tried to reverse psychology me and was like, "Okay, you can watch one," thinking I'll get scared and not want to watch them ever again.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't work. I was like, "Okay, let's watch another one and another one." And then
Wow.
night for the whole month of October, I was up watching all the classics. I was watching Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play. Vampire in Brooklyn was one of the... I think that was actually my first vampire movie ever. And I was like, "Yeah, this is the world that I need to be in." And I just wanted more and more. And then by the time I was in 2nd grade, I was going to the movies to see the movies on the big screen.
Right.
And my mom took me to see Hannibal when I was like 8, and I was like, let's just keep this going.
Yeah, so you just knew from a young age, like, yo, this genre is crazy. Okay. All right. Okay, well, let me ask you this, because when it comes to the horror genre, I consider myself a casual fan. It's not a genre that I necessarily seek out unless it has like a crazy plot that I've never seen before or something that really looks unique. So what is it to you coming, I guess, you and Mars are experts on this, but for you, what makes a good horror movie? Is it, more environment? Is it more atmospheric? Is it so much like, character development and like the background of a particular character? Like, what for you would make like the perfect horror film?
A great horror film has depth, so it's you get a well-developed backstory and character development, and then it's going to have... I feel like what makes it scary, it's going to differ from each movie. I don't think you can sum up what makes a great horror movie based on one or two things, because for some people, they get scared of demonology, and for other people, they're more afraid of a serial killer, but it's taking that fear and making it believable and making it immersive. So you need great sound design. I feel like for most horror movies, if you mute the movie, it won't be as scary because you're not immersed in that world. So sound design, direction, and story, I feel like that all those 3 things really make a perfect horror movie. I'm really into Ari Aster movies right now, like Midsommar and Hereditary, because they have all 3 of those things where it's visually compelling, it has great sound design. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's one shot where in Hereditary, the mom is like chopping carrots on a cutting board, and you can hear the knife slicing into the carrot and hitting the board, and it's so crisp, and it's like you're in the room, in the kitchen with her. And yeah, it's like you're there, and when you feel like you're in it, it makes the story real, and then that's what makes the story scary.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess for me, the thing I really look for when I do indulge in horror is more atmospheric. You know, you're not really gonna get me with jump scares. You're really not gonna get me with like over the top supernatural stories, but more so if I feel like uneasy just watching you walk around a certain environment, that is what to me makes an amazing, horror movie. So definitely. So as far as the podcast, how did you and Mars connect when it came to the podcast, and what was your like overall goal with this particular podcast? Was it just something like, yo, two friends getting together, we already have these conversations, so let's just put it out there, or did you guys go into it with a particular goal of mine?
Definitely just as two friends coming together saying, hey, we have these conversations, let's record them. But we wanted to put structure to it and didn't exactly know how. We were still new to the podcast world and still kind of recommending different shows to each other. And we've been friends for about, I think, 8 years now.
Oh, nice.
So we've seen many horror movies, many director commentaries together, and even worked together in that realm. So we always view movies differently when we see them together, and we always get really excited to talk to each other after we see a movie. And we thought, hey, nobody else is talking about the specific things that we're talking about with these movies. We should record it and make a podcast.
Yeah.
Mars actually was the one that kind of drafted up notes for the show, and we, while we were recording, I started asking her questions from the notes. And it wasn't supposed to go that way. It was supposed to be more free form, but we ended up keeping that as our format for the show. And we turned those questions into segments like funny, cool, scary, and what makes it a horror movie? What are the themes? What did you think about the acting and the visuals? And those are all things that we cover within the show, and it's typically about an hour long of us just laughing. And our favorite segment is where did they F up, because nobody talks about this when it comes to a horror movie podcast. Everyone's like, oh yeah, this was good and this is bad, I like this because of this. But tell me specifically in the writing and in the character development, like where did the characters F up to where all of this unraveled, or where they could have saved the day and they chose not to, or so and then tackling it from a Black experience. We don't know of a lot of other Black people that are into the horror genre and that have a podcast talking about horror movie reviews. So we felt like our voices are needed there, and it just kind of took off.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Like we were saying earlier, just having that representation, and who knows, there may be, other Black women or Black men that are into the same things you are. And if they see you doing this, that may give them enough courage or the inspiration to do it themselves. So I feel like what you two are doing is awesome, and it's good stuff. So what do you feel is the future of horror? Because when I look at all the latest technology coming out, everything from VR to sensory touch and things like that, do you think that horror would benefit from it being kind of engulfed in the whole VR movement right now, like virtual reality?
I don't see that. I think it could be a possibility. If you look back at the dawn of horror with William D. Castle movies, such as the original 13 Ghosts and what else did he do? House on Haunted Hill. He actually incorporated things like 3D. He had the first 3D horror movie, 13 Ghosts, I
didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. He had the, blue and red film glasses, and but they were either all blue or all red. If you got the all blue, that kind of made the ghosts almost transparent because he had their makeup done in blue hues.
Right.
And then if you put on the red glasses, it would make the ghosts pop out at you because they're done in blue hues. And then with House on Haunted Hill, he had skeletons floating through the theater rooms, the auditoriums. So I feel like horror has always meant to be was always meant to be immersive. I feel like it's always supposed to be another world that you go to let out angst, or to allow yourself to feel fear and just kind of let go. So I totally see VR and more immersive movie experiences being in the future, perhaps having even scare actors at the theater, or I don't know, like I can totally see it happening. I feel like William Castle was just a little ahead of his time and people thought it was corny, but honestly his movies weren't that great, but people went because of the experience.
Right, absolutely. That's so dope. I didn't even know that. Like, I just learned something right there. I didn't even know that. Okay. So he kind of pioneered the whole, like, not just it being a film, but also being, like you said, an immersive experience. And that's probably going to make it more memorable. Like, you're not probably going to remember the script or, necessarily the individual characters, but you are going to remember if the ghost popped out at you during it, watching it in the theater and things like that.
Exactly. He wanted his movies to be a whole experience, and so with every movie that he did, he had some kind of gimmick. And fun fact, he was supposed to direct Rosemary's Baby, but the studio didn't want him to make it too gimmicky and have a demon baby in a stroller or something in the auditorium, so they only let him produce it and they had someone else direct, but he does make a cameo in the film, which is really rad.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. Well, where can they find your podcast? I'm going to link it down below, but just so people who are just listening, where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, you can find GoreFriends on any major streaming platform: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio. We're literally on everything from birth to death. You can find us anywhere.
Dope. That's so dope. Yeah. Now, as far as your anime, I commented on one of your photos today.
Yeah.
Because I saw that, you had the Yu Yu Hakusho thing going on, and Yu Yu Hakusho is like I used to get so mad at people who thought Yu Yu Hakusho ended at the Toguro brothers saga. It is
man, you think it ends there, and does that saga ever really end? Like, it went on forever. Every time you thought they were gone, they weren't. But Yusuke Urameshi is like my guy. Like, that's my guy.
Yeah, the only character I just never cared for was Kuwabara. I just thought he was very annoying. But I guess he was supposed to be the parody character. He was supposed to be like the comic relief. But so how did you get into
character? He's a sweet character.
So how did you get into anime? Because everybody, it seems like, for at least if you grew up in the United States, usually there was two shows that really got people into anime. It was either Pokemon, which was a phenomenon. I don't think people really understand how big Pokemon was back then, and Dragon Ball Z. Those were like the two gateway animes that got people into the the genre of animation. For you, what anime was that, and how did you get into anime?
Oh man, I went way far back because, like I said earlier, my uncles were really into anime and like Stephen Chow movies and stuff. So I started out watching like 80s anime.
Oh wow.
Like 80s and 90s anime on VHS tapes. I remember, I think the first anime series I watched in full was called 3x3 Eyes, and it was like a limited series. My uncle had the whole VHS set, and I remember watching Princess Mononoke. And Ranma 1/2. Oh man, way back. Wow. And then I got into Dragon Ball, not Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball.
Yeah,
and
which is the better series.
Then I got into Pokemon, And then it was like a snowball from there. But I also watched a lot of thriller anime and horror anime as a kid too. Like Lily Cat was one of the first anime movies that I've seen, and that's a space horror anime movie. A lot of body horror in that movie. So warning. And Akira. Like,
Akira's a classic. Yeah.
I go way back, man.
Yo, that's
these youngins. They don't even know. They're too young. They don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it also kind of comes from, you growing up in Los Angeles, because I was having this discussion with Mars. Over in Los Angeles, it is a melting pot. So you have all this exposure to all these different cultures, which can lead to you being exposed to a lot of things, I guess, earlier than most people kind of catch on. I always felt like New York and LA was kind of ahead of the curve when it came to a lot of media. And then again, media, capital there. So that kind of makes sense. But for me, I think it, growing up, anime was not necessarily talked about. I come from North Florida, Jacksonville to be exact. And I think for a lot of kids that I grew up around, it was definitely Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z that kind of exposed anime. But then you had Cartoon Network pull the best move ever by having a dedicated block called Toonami. Everybody... Toonami was like the go-to. That was like a ritual for me. After school, go home, throw the backpack down, and go watch Toonami all the way from top to bottom, whether it was Tenchi Muyo or Yu Yu Hakusho or Gundam or Dragon Ball, whatever the case is. So that definitely, kind of brought anime full circle for me. And of course, as I got older, I started looking at the top animes like, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Death Note, D&A Angel, Fruit Basket, Sailor Moon, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think the exposure to anime definitely for a lot of kids was Toonami. I think that was like the turning point where anime was start to look at as cool.
Yeah, it definitely, Toonami made anime more accessible because back then we didn't have, a lot of, not everyone had a computer at home.
Right.
And then not everyone had a fast internet connection.
Oh, yeah.
So, everyone wasn't on like Crunchyroll and Funimation. Like, we didn't have all of this stuff to just, go to for anime. I had to, ask my brother to remind me to come in the house in time to catch my shows. And I remember, sneaking to the TV late at night to watch like Inuyasha
Inuyasha's my joint.
Hellsing or Witch Hunter Robin, like all those amazing shows that would come on in the wee hours of the night, and I would just watch it religiously every week and just it's crazy.
Yeah. So what has your experience been like, because I know we kind of talked about this earlier with, the whole gatekeeping thing. Just kind of walk me through your experience being not only a woman that's an anime, but a Black woman liking anime. Like, what was that like throughout the years till now?
Man. At first, it wasn't really talked about. Like, it's not something you come out and say when people are like, oh, what are you into? You never mentioned anime. Like, I don't know if that was your experience, but that was mine back in the day, like back in high school.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if someone say, what are you into? You'll say video games. That's something that every demographic can get into. Or you'll say comics even, but anime for some reason is like that one weird thing that no one wants to admit that they're into because they don't know what your reaction is going to be. That was my experience. And then when you find out that someone else is into anime and manga, you're like, wait, you know what that is? And then you get to like totally geek over it, which is really exciting. But then on the flip side of that, I've gone to conventions and I have friends that like to cosplay with me.
Sure.
And there are times where I'll give you one example where I asked my friend to wait for me in one spot because you know how crowded cons are.
Yeah. I
had to go and get programs for the con. And so I said, stand right here, don't move. I have to get the programs. So I went to get the programs and As I was approaching her again, there are these guys that weren't people of color, and they're like, oh, girls just come here to stand around and look cute. And I'm like, okay, dude, what? And we get a lot of that, and we get a lot of quizzing, like, oh, what happened in this and that. And I'm like, bro, you only watch shonen, like, miss me with that. And they're like, oh, what happened in this?
I just do not get it. Like, I like, what is the purpose of gatekeeping? Like, if I'm at a con and I, like, just say I meet someone who just happens to be a woman and she's into anime, she's into all these things, it just doesn't come to my mind to be like, oh, you know, let me just ask this quick questionnaire to figure out, like, why, number one, why is it such an issue? You know,
I know why. I know why.
Like, please.
It's because for so long, nerds have had this secret club where they can go to and feel safe, you know, because everybody around them didn't understand them and didn't want to understand them. And so they had to kind of run away from the norms of society and create a subculture for themselves. And now it's being mass produced. Now everybody is coming out and saying, hey, I'm a nerd too. And they don't feel special anymore. You know what I mean? Before it was like, oh, I'm different from everyone else. And, you know, being different is a good thing. If you're different, you're cool in your own way, and you're, you know, a superhero to somebody. Or, you know, I always joke around that The Matrix is literally about a bunch of nerds saving the world. And so when everybody around you is a nerd, it's like, what makes me special now?
Makes a lot of sense. But on the flip side of that, I think it is, I think in saying that, when they did have that subculture, I think the desire was to make it where it was normalized. I think everybody wanted it to be normalized. You know, it's kind of hard for me to imagine that, you know, if you were into this and you had to hide your interest, that would be a good feeling. So now that it does have this mass exposure and you do have people who wouldn't normally be into something, you know, I would feel like, hey, that is awesome. You know, because it had to start from somewhere. So like, if we were able to get this to the mainstream, then we did our job. But I guess a lot of people don't look at it that way, apparently.
Yeah, I actually disagree. I don't feel like this subculture was created to be normalized. I mean, as far as corporations go, of course, but as far as, you know, a small group of friends, let's say like the Stranger Things group, right? They kind of represent all of the, you know, nerd groups back in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
I don't feel like those particular individuals wanted it to be mainstream, because that kind of takes their power away in a world where they feel powerless. Not saying it's right, but I feel like they wanted for once to say, I'm the gatekeeper now, or this is my club and you have to ask me to come in. Whereas, you know, they go to school and, you know, they're like, hey, you don't belong here, you're weird, and they don't fit in anywhere else. So now they've gone and they essentially started their own nation, and they're like, oh, now we can tell you guys who can come in and who's worthy and who's good enough. And it's a power trip, essentially. And I feel like a lot of nerds inherited that elitist state of mind because they feel powerless in every other aspect of their life, and that's the one thing they cling to.
Makes a lot of sense.
Too deep? Is that a reach?
Yo.
I don't know. There's a segment of GoreFriends called Stories Reach, where I just do these crazy reaches, but that's what I do.
I think that's pretty accurate, you know? Like, I have thought about that. I don't think I put that much thought into it, though. So it's very, you know, the fact that you just kind of broke that down and just like, yo, this is what I think is going on. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense putting two and two together.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you think about who these groups are that are portrayed in all these old shows, you can even look at like that 70s show and other shows where they have these, you know, this group of outsiders that kind of convene in a club where they can talk about all their liked interests, they're mostly men and they're mostly white. You know what I mean? Like they weren't all that inclusive. So I don't feel like it was ever meant to be inclusive, but other people are into it too. And then it was like a fire and it spread, and they're like, oh, our club isn't special anymore. Now what can I find that's special about me? But really, people need to know that everyone is special and everyone's dope. Yes. And we need to just celebrate, all of our common interests and all of our differences, honestly.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, okay. Well, we're running on an hour, so I'm going to let you have the rest of your night. Is there anything else that you would like to plug, or any other lines of businesses that you have that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, man, if you want to follow me on Instagram, I mostly post on my stories nowadays because today's climate, I just haven't been making regular posts, but
I feel you.
I'm GoryxStory on social media and also on Twitch if you'd like to follow me. I will start streaming regularly eventually. I'm in the middle of moving, so after this weekend, I'll be all moved and settled into my new space, and I'm actually going to have a streaming setup, so I'm excited for that.
Very nice.
And if you need a writer, I am for hire.
There we go. Well, Story, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for kicking it with me for an hour, and I'll hit you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No doubt.